Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tajina Jasmine, and today I will be the master ceremony of the 4th International Conference on Law Studies, also known as the 4th Incols. The Excellency, Rector of University of Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta, Dr. Erna Hernawati, AK CPMA CA. The Excellency, Dean of Law Faculty of University of Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta, Dr. Haji Abdul Halim MAG. The Excellency, the Head of the Law Department, Dr. Heru Sugiono SH.MH. The Excellency, the Head of the Law Study Program Taufikur Rahman SH.MKN. The Honorable Mrs. Valerie Julian, UN Resident Coordinator for the Republic of Indonesia. The Honorable Professor Tim Lindsey AO, Malcolm Smith Chair of Asian Law, the University of Melbourne. The Honorable Mr. Coley F. Brown, Country Manager and Licensed to ASEAN United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. The Honorable Mr. Lawrence Becker, PhD, Lecturer of Amsterdam University. The Honorable Professors and Lecturers of the University of Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta, and not to forget the respected audiences, particularly from UNODC Indonesia and all audiences of this seminar. Welcome to the 4th International Conference on Law Studies by Faculty of Law, University of Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta. Before we start the conference, let us give our gratitude and praise to God because of His blessing and mercy. International Conference on Law Studies, or Incols, is an annual event held by the Law Faculty of Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta, which discusses the latest international issues. The 4th edition, Incols' main topic is equity, social justice, and the rule of law across the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, brace yourself for a high-octane dose of entertainment. A dance performance by Seni Tari Veteran Jakarta, Nandak Ganjen, and Kalimantan Dance. For Istivija, the time and place are yours.
Soundnya nggak?
STPJ Seni Tari Veteran Jakarta.
Thank you, STPG, for such a graceful, mesmerizing, synchronized dance move. So the first dance is Nandak Ganjen dance is a new creation dance with Betawi culture references. The dance was created by Antong Sukirman, one of the sons of Mr. Kesam Jiun, the leader of the East Jakarta Betawi Ratna Mask group. This dance is a form of expression of joy and freedom by young people. The second dance is the Kalimantan dance, originally traditionally from Kalimantan province. Thank you, STVJ, for such graceful, mesmerizing, synchronized dance move. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. As an opening, there will be a short welcoming remark given by the Dean of Law Faculty of the University of Pembangunan National Veteran Jakarta, Dr. Haji Abdul Halim MAG. The timing room are yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Abdul Halim. I'm standing here on behalf of the Faculty of Law, Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta. I would like to express my appreciation to all speakers from many countries and participants from many universities in Indonesia and other countries. Ladies and gentlemen, International Conference on Law Studies is an annual conference held by Faculty of Law, Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Jakarta. The first conference was conducted in 2019, and now is the fourth conference with theme Equity, Social Justice, and role of law across the sustainable development goals. In this opportunity, it is a honor for us that we can invite speakers from prominent institutions and university. There are Excellency Ibu Valeria Julian. Welcome, Bu Valeria Julian, as a keynote speaker from UN Resident Coordinator from the Republic of Indonesia. And then with us also Professor Tim Lindsey, Pak Tim. Welcome, Pak Tim, from Melbourne University, Australia. Saya kebetulan nih Bu Diani teringat dengan Pak Tim ini pada tahun 2006 ya, ada kurikulum dengan Pak Tim, dan kemudian juga sedikit bahasa Indonesia ini. Ketika ada peneliti membantu Pak Tim ya meneliti Islamic courts in Indonesia, yaitu sebuah riset Pak Tim. And then also Prof. Jeko Berkuzen from University of Limpopo, South Africa. Welcome, Pak Jeko. Pak Lawrence Baker, PhD from Amsterdam University. Christopher, PhD from Washington University School of Law, Colin A. Brown as a country manager and relation to Asian United Nations Office on Drug and Crime. Incols is an even where legal scholars from various institutions and countries can meet together. This is such a valuable opportunity for us all as legal scholars to share idea, research finding, and this scientific forum. This is our commitment to enhance of knowledge by inviting international speakers from various countries in the world to talk about current issue and global topic in the field of law and related with the topic equality, equity, social justice, and rule of law across the sustainable development goals. Therefore, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to all speakers and participants for these collaborations. I hope that we can maintain and expand the collaboration in the future. I hope that all participants can use this opportunity to enhance our understanding of the issue and produce thought and ideas useful for the development of law in global era. I would like to also to thanks to Ibu Aurora and all committees for their hard work and make this conference happen. Thank you, Bu Aurora and committees. Thank you also to all speakers, presenters, and participants. Also warm welcome to all this conference, and thank you for your participation in this conference. Last but not least, we would like to express our gratitude and appreciation to your willingness to join in this conference and share your idea. I hope you all enjoy in this conference, and I hope that we will have productive and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Welcome. Thank you, Dr. Haji Abdul Halim, for the wonderful remarks. Today's conference is going to be moderated by Mr. Muhammad Faiz Aziz SH, SIPLLM, and Dr. Aurora Juliana Meliala SHMH. But first, allow me to read the CV of Mr. Muhammad Faiz Aziz SH, SIPLLM, and Dr. Aurora Juliana Meliala SHMH. Mr. Muhammad Faiz Aziz SH, SIPLLM is a lecturer and head of business law studies at the Indonesian General School of Law, or STH. Currently, he is also a researcher and director of cooperation and collaboration at the Center for the Study of Indonesian Policy Law, or PSHK. He obtained a Bachelor of Law from the University of Indonesia in 2003, a Bachelor of Political Science from the Universitas Terbuka in 2006, and a Master of Law from the National University of Malaysia in 2016 through the Indonesian Education Scholarship, which is managed by the Education Fund Management Institute, or LPDP, of the Indonesian Ministry of Finance. His fields include civil law, international civil law, economics or business, creative economy, companies or corporation, marine or maritime, business competition, e-commerce, borders, finance, and environmental economics. He has conducted various researches in this field, and he also often assists in policymakers in reviewing and formulating policies and regulations related to these fields or sectors. That is all for Mr. Muhammad Faiz Aziz SH, IPLLM. Next to Dr. Aurora Juliana Meliala. Dr. Aurora Gilana Meliala completed her undergraduate, postgraduate, and doctoral studies at the Faculty of Law, the University of Indonesia, with a concentration in economic law. Before deciding to pursue a career in academia, she also worked for BUMN and multinational companies, including PT Jasa Marga Tbk, ConocoPhillips Ltd, the Benelux Chamber of Commerce, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, and was actively involved in several international economic events, including the Belgian Economic Mission, Netherlands Economic Mission, and Indonesia Investment Forum. Currently, she works as a lecturer at the University of Pembangunan National Veteran Jakarta, teaching international economic law, international civil law, and legal philosophy. The areas of discipline that she focuses on developing include critical legal studies, comparative economic law, and analysis of the influence of the political economy on the development of legal structures. She is also active in the legal practice as a lawyer and investment law consultant. That is all for the CV. That was great and incredible. Now, Mr. Muhammad Faiz Aziz and Dr. Aurora Gilana Meliala, the room are yours.
Thank you, Tajna. Good afternoon in Indonesia and good afternoon in Australia. Good morning in the Netherlands. Please allow me to greet with Indonesian greetings. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May God give us prosperity. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Shalom, and Salam Kebajikan. This is Indonesian greeting tradition that usually used in most of the forum, and it comes from the several religious ways. So my name is Muhammad Faiz Aziz, and I will be moderating this event, jointly moderating this event with Dr. Aurora Meliana, aka Dr. Ola. And I would like firstly to welcome First Excellency Director of the University of Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta, Dr. Erna Hernawati, aka CPMACA, the Excellency, the Dean of the Faculty of Law, the University of Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta, Dr. Haji Abdul Salim, MAG, the Excellency, the Head of the Law Department, Dr. Heru Sugiono, SHMH, the Excellency, the Head of the Law Study Program, Mr. Taufikur Rahman, SHMH, Her Excellency, Madam Valerie Julian, United Nations Resident Coordinator for the Republic of Indonesia, Honorable Professor Tim Lindsey, AO, Malcolm Smith Chair of Asian Law at the University of Melbourne, the Honorable Mr. Collier Brown, Country Manager of Amsterdam. And I would like to welcome also to all the guests and distinguished speaker, as well as the participant in this fourth international conference on the law studies held by the University Pembangunan Veteran Jakarta. And the topic of this conference is about the equity, social justice, and the rules of all across the sustainable development goals. There is no doubt that we need to reset the direction of the world economy from one widening inequality, social exclusion, and massive environmental threat to the cost of sustainable development. A path for the world in which prosperity share, societies are inclusive, and the environment is kept safe. To do so, in September 2015, all member states of the United Nations have agreed to adopt Transforming the World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is a universal action plan for global cooperation and sustainable development for the period 2015 to 2030. To leave no one behind, the 2030 Agenda has defined 17 sustainable development goals, and with the target, the numbers of the 169 targets. Ola?
Thank you very much, Mr. Faiz Aziz. That was a warm welcome. And clearly that was not a complete, that was really a complex task, which did not happen over a short time. The pandemic has contributed to the root causes and drivers of conflict. and instability, challenge the delivery of public services, threaten the rule of law, and increase inequality and exclusions. With these international seminars, it is hoped that we can highlight innovations made in response to the pandemic, including approaches to build a sustainable development in conflict-affected contexts, strengthen institutional resilience, promote people-centered justice, and address inequalities while leaving no one behind. So for Mr. Aziz, could you please explain our first keynote speaker, read the CV, and to also maybe give a brief about our special guest in here, Ibu Valerie.
Thank you, Ola. I would like to introduce our first speaker that will deliver the keynote speech, Madam Valerie Julian, the United Nations Resident Coordinator for the Republic of Indonesia. Let me read the brief of Madam Valerie's CV. Madam Valerie Julian of France has been working in the United Nations for the last 27 years. Prior to Indonesia, she served as resident coordinator in Nepal, in Guatemala, and as well as in the Dominican Republic. She also worked for 14 years with the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or CHA, in different countries in Africa. Before joining the UN system, she was Handicapped International Program Director for Serbia and Bosnia in 1990s. And from 1984 to 1992, she works in various positions in publishing company in Paris, most notably as General Director of Biba, a French woman magazine, and publisher of various magazines in Group Express in France and in Poland. Madam Julian holds a Master in Political Science from the Institut d'études politiques. Apologize me if there is a false word from since it is France, and a Master in Management from the Institut de Gestion Sociale. Madam Valerie Julian speaks French, English, and Spanish. Madam Valerie Julian, the floor is yours for the next 15 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. No worries about the English, the French accent, because I don't speak Bahasa Indonesia either. I want to tell you just selamat sore, and really a big pleasure to be with you all today. And I want to greet all of you, of course, the Dean of Faculty, and all of you, the distinguished delegates, the academics, the speakers who are going to come, and above all the students from across Asia. It's really, really a big pleasure for me to be with you at this 4th International Conference for Law Studies at Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jakarta. So I also understand that today is the Faculty of Law's 2nd anniversary. So I want to offer my sincere congratulations to the institution. 22 years, it's big. Now you are a major one. But also I want to congratulate you for the contribution that you have made as an institution to legal education in Indonesia. So the theme of today's discussion is equity, social justice, and the rule of law across the Sustainable Development Goals. And actually, maybe I would like to start by saying that this is the word across that I think is the most important one. And it's the most correct word to really describe the relationship that exists between rule of law and the SDGs. Because we all know that the SDGs are interdependent. They come as a package. You can't achieve one if you don't work on the other one. But more than any other goals, the SDG 16 underpins the SDGs as a whole. And as you know, SDG 16 focuses on peace, justice, and strong institution. Actually, more specifically, if you look at the detail of SDG 16, this is when you see that it's about protecting children, for instance, from abuse, exploitation, trafficking, violence, reducing all these forms of violence. It's also about their legal identity and for everybody to have a legal identity, equal access to justice. It's also about combating organized crime, corruption, bribery, making sure that institutions are accountable and transparent. It is also about the participation of people in the decision-making processes and strengthening also the global governance. And it's also about people having access to information. So it's part of transparency, but also protecting their fundamental freedom. Well, when we listen to that, we say, well, in itself, SDG 16 is already a whole agenda. And it's only one of the 17 SDGs. And there are, of course, two main means of achieving the targets that are in this SDG. On the one hand, we have to make sure that national institutions are stronger, better, well-equipped with the proper capacity. And on the other hand, we need to promote, develop, and enforce the laws and policies that will generate a society that is not making any discrimination among people because everybody is equal. And it's also the concept of leaving no one behind. So foundational, strong institution, it's actually very essential to development. That means that without SDG 16, we cannot achieve development. There is no way. Because actually the antithesis of peace, justice, and strong institution, it's actually war and chaos. And we don't need to look far, for example, on how quickly development aims can fall apart when the rule of law fails. Actually, even before the onset of the COVID pandemic, the world, for instance, was sliding backwards on hunger after decades of progress. Well, why was that? There are a lot of factors: overfishing, climate change, destabilized food systems. All these are man-made disasters, actually, you know. And there is also a number one factor, which is man-made conflict, okay? Because conflict don't happen on their own. They happen because of people. And why is that? Well, because there weren't the necessary adequate laws to protect the people on the planet, or because institutions were not strong enough, capacitated enough to enforce the laws and the rule of law. So, for instance, in Yemen, talking about war, you know, the conflict has been going on for 7 years, and we know now that there are more than 17 million people who are in need of food assistance. And when we look at the situation of Russia's invasion of Ukraine now, 1 month after this invasion, we already see how the wheat prices have increased by 21%, barley prices by 33%, and fertilizer by 40%. And it's something that we feel here in Indonesia. So the war in Ukraine is one of the factors that has caused the price of cooking oil in Indonesia to surge. And why is that? Well, breaches of international law in Europe. And those breaches of international laws in Europe are being felt by families here who are preparing their iftar meals in Southeast Asia. And it's only the very beginning of the repercussion. So rule of law is really essential. And as per the common definition, the rule of law is the principle that all persons, institutions, and entities, public and private, including the state itself, are accountable to law. So what does it mean? It means that everybody in society is liable to law and must comply with the laws. No one, even people in power, can be above the law. And the very foundation of a democratic society rely upon this basic rule. So rule of law is really the most important characteristic of a democracy. So you see, the UN knew how fundamental SDG 16 would be long before the SDGs were conceived, because actually peace, justice, and rule of law are engraved into the very foundation of our international organization. Actually, if you look at the UN Charter mandates that all member countries, big or small, powerful or not, have access to the same rights: one country, one vote. This is the essential nature of peace, justice, and the rule of law. And this is also why member states adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. as one of the first acts after they ratified the UN Charter. Because without guaranteeing human rights, without defining human rights and guaranteeing human rights and access to justice, you don't have a foundation upon which you can establish international law. So today the UN upholds human rights through what we call our normative agenda. The normative agenda of the UN, it's really the work that is being done together with all the member states in defining the conventions, the treaties, the international laws that elaborate a world order, in the absence of which it would be chaos and the powerful countries would dominate the less strong ones, and that would be chaos. And that's why, for instance, we also have mechanisms to review the compliance. This is done through a number of systems and committees and so on and so forth. But for instance, we also have a mechanism that is called the Universal Periodic Review, which is a peer review. Member states review another member state in terms of the human rights record. And for instance, in November this year, Indonesia will undergo its fourth Universal Periodic Review. So on that occasion, all the member states will be studied, reviewed. There isn't one single member state that can say, oh no, I'm above that, you can't review my human rights situation, because all member states' situation is reviewed. And through this review, there are some indication of what should be done in order to improve the human rights situation in the country. So the UN is engaged everywhere to support strong institutions that will affirm human rights. And one of the ways we do that in Indonesia, for instance, is through the work that we do, where we really put human security at the center of all our efforts to prevent, for instance, violent extremism, which, like wars, has the capacity to undo decades of development works in a few moments. Much actually of our counterterrorism efforts are channeled through the Peace Hub, which the Peace Hub is a mechanism that we have put in place in my office to really allow the combined expertise of all the UN agencies, the government and civil society organizations to work together towards the prevention of violent extremism and counterterrorism. And my colleague, Collie Brown, the representative of UNODC, will later present also some of the UNODC work on criminal justice reform. So the first step to fulfilling any aspects of the Global Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030 begin with restoring security and human rights to individuals whose very lives and basic freedoms are under threat, either due to direct violence or through institutional restriction to justice. Actually, if you look at the predecessor to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, they are the Millennium Development Goals, and they were over the period 2000 to 2015. Many of the countries that did not achieve the goals of the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, by 2015, were actually countries that had experienced armed conflict and instability. So the rule of law actually, therefore, gives us a predictable, ordered society. It promotes justice, fairness, and individual freedom. It is a shield against the arbitrary exercise of power. So when we consider how much fundamental, strong institution, peace and justice are to everything we do, it can be very frustrating to see human rights relegated to an aspirational aspect of development. And this is what happens, unfortunately, sometimes. Let us be very clear. Without human rights, there is no rule of law and no equality, because justice is rooted in equality. And equality and dignity are two essential, equality and equity are two essential dimensions of peace and dignity. You know, I often quote the French humanist André Comte-Sponville. I don't know if some of you know him. And he actually said the following. Listen to me carefully, because what he said is, we don't have the same rights because we are equal. I repeat, We don't have the same rights because we are equal. No, we are equal because we have the same rights. So what it means is that these are the rights that have been addicted that create equality and equity. Because as a matter of fact, we are not born equal. Countries are not equal in terms of strength, wealth, and so on and so forth, or size. So laws and the rule of law equalize those inherent natural unbalance or inequalities. Laws are the intelligence that correct our default. And you know, what is interesting also is that in nature, there is a natural balance. You don't see animals killing each other like humans do. They only kill each other to survive, but not for the pleasure, not for the way we do it as humans. Because humans actually, unlike other vegetal and animal creatures in that world, possess the capacity to destroy itself. So if you want laws and the rule of law, domesticate, I would like to say, the wildest creature of all, human beings, people. And when the laws are not there, or when they are not enforced and respected, as I said before, there is chaos and war. Without laws and rule of law, we would kill each other. We would abuse each other. We would generate our own extension, as actually we have been doing somewhat, a little bit with COVID-19, because COVID-19 wouldn't have happened if we had taken care of nature. And above all, as we do with what we call today the triple planetary crisis, climate change, pollution, and the destruction of nature and biodiversity that is so essential to our own survival. And you see, interestingly enough, and despite knowing this, most people turn a blind eye to this crisis. We are actually sowing the very branch we are sitting on. And we do that blissfully oblivious of the consequences. And you know, there is another aspect that I want to highlight when we talk about SDG 16. One of the reasons I think SDG 16 is not always given the priority it is due, because it demands a real accountability from leaders, including on issues such as corruption. And as I said earlier, many leaders and governments around the world see SDGs 1, 2, 3, 4, and many others as achievable. But interestingly enough, they see SDG 5, gender equality, SDG 10, combating inequalities, and SDG 16, on rule of law, as aspirational. You know, we could approach them, come closer, but not really achieve them. The reason is because SDG 5, 10, and 16 require from everyone, but first and foremost from leaders, the absolute commitment, the absolute correctness and honesty. Is it too much asking to our leaders? I don't think so. But truth be told, seldom people ask this to their leaders. Again, let me give you an example. Did you notice? If somebody now comes and steals from your purse or your wallet 1,000 rupiah or 100,000 rupiahs, people will scream thief, and that person will be taken and put to jail. That person is a thief. But when the leaders at national or local level steal from the coffer, that is called corruption, by the way, profit on the collective goods, this is called corruption. What do people do?
Excuse me, Madam Valerie.
Yes.
2 minutes more.
Okay. People say, oh, well, this is the way it is. They shrug their shoulders and that's it. But truth be told, what is stolen then by the corruption is not 1,000 rupiah. It's like thousands of millions of rupiah. So leaders, businesses, people must always choose ethics over opportunism. And as a matter of fact, we measure the commitment of countries, government, and leaders to the rule of law by the level of efforts they make on achieving SDG 16. And in democracies, people hold in their hands, through their votes, their voices, the right and capacity to hold their leaders accountable. So events like this, the 4th International Conference for Law Studies, help us in bolstering those commitments and raising awareness on our individual responsibility. So again, allow me to congratulate Universitas Pembangunan National Veteran Jakarta on hosting this international event and on the Law Faculty 22nd anniversary. And I really look forward on engaging discussion ahead. And I think that with that, I haven't gone beyond my time. Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak.
Thank you so much, Madam Valerie Julian, for the interesting and intriguing speech for us. One aspect that have been underlined for this about the goal 16, that is the most important across all goals, and rule of law itself become the champion, I guess, for achieving all the sustainable development goal itself in the future, including in all member states, including in Indonesia itself. So before, thank you once again for Madam Valerie Julian. Before I move to Ola, I would like to remind all of the participants, if you may type your question for the speakers in chat columns, and please mention to whom the question will be delivered. Okay, for the next speaker, I would like to move to Ola to introduce the second speaker. Please, Ola.
Thank you, Mr. Faiz. So that's really a thoughtful speech from you, Ibu Valerie. Thank you very much. I still remember our senior lecturer, Ibu Diani, who's also the senior, if I'm not mistaken, Ibu Diani is that right, senior advisors to the Minister of National Development Planning. She always said that the goal point 16 is the enabler of all the goals in the SDGs. So that was really thoughtful speech that has been given by Ibu Valerie, that she speaks about how the society is actually rely on the basic rule of law, and peace, justice, and rule of law itself has no meaning if there is no human rights guaranteed. Human rights supposed to be the very basic of the whole structure. That's really thoughtful. And it is also the base of international law as provisions under the UN Charter itself. So our next speakers will be from the academicians. We're looking forward to see his opinion about how exactly the society maybe can embrace the rule of law as the very nature agent for the sustainable development goals to be enhanced in the society. It would be Mr. Lawrence Baker, who will speaking next. He is the associate professor at the Department of Anthropology of the University of Amsterdam. He holds a master on arts and cultural anthropology from Leiden University and completed his PhD in social anthropology and law from Radboud University Nijmegen, a specialist in conflict over natural resources usage, in particular land, and the socio-political and legal role of security groups in Indonesian society. Mr. Baker is also the chair of the program committee of the Research Master Social Science at the UVA. For you, Mr. Lawrence Baker, time and place is given.
Okay, thank you very much, Mbak Oda. Let me first start by thanking the organization for inviting me. Betul sekali saya senang sekali bertemu lagi dengan teman-teman dari Indonesia, walaupun ya sedang ada setengah dunia antara kita. But that's just what life is like. It's very nice to meet, even if it's through the internet. So, Ibu Rector, esteemed Papa Dekan, dear members of the faculty, staff, and of course, large audience, the students, it's very nice to be talking to you. And I have been asked by the organizing committee to talk to you about the role of customary law, and if at all possible, in a comparative perspective within this entire discussion. And I thought, like, well, a comparative perspective, what would that be? And they said, well, you just compare your work in Indonesia with the Netherlands. Why not? And I was like, that's actually quite intriguing. So that is what I prepared to talk to you about, and what I hope will in certain ways connect with the talk that Ibu Valerie just held for us. And I shall see if I can, yes, I'll share my screen so I can have some slides to show you. If all went well, you see my screen now. So I called this brief presentation Customary Rights and Dangerous Resource Exploitation, the Netherlands and Indonesia compared. And I called it dangerous because I mean the type of resource exploitation that is dangerous for people who live somewhere for a variety of reasons. The first question, of course, is why would you bother comparing Indonesia and the Netherlands on such a subject? And my answer to that would be, well, for two important reasons, basically. Firstly, because we are talking about a legal principle, customary law, which may or may not have the same validity in these two different countries. But if we're talking about custom, we're also talking about a social principle. Something may be part of the law or not, but it's always part of the lives of people. The ways in which people live, in which they do things, what they experience as being fair or honest, or what they have a right to. And such a feeling, such a notion of how things should be is not necessarily what is predicted or represented in the legal system. And in preparing this, I asked, like, well, we know that customary law, hukum adat or adat in various forms comes to the fore in Indonesian law in various types. In the Netherlands, it's not so visible, as I'll show you shortly. But nevertheless, the type of issues that are going on, the types of arguments and the types in which the issues are being addressed are very, very similar. And that is something which doesn't only hold true for looking at Indonesia and the Netherlands, it also holds true for looking at many other countries. And whereas customary law is sometimes being seen as, yeah, that's outdated, that's old, it's not really of this time, my argument is going to be that the issues that customary law addresses are issues that are very much alive, even in nations which maintain that they do not use customary law anymore. So let me briefly say something about customary law in the Netherlands, or customary rights. They actually have a fairly solid position within the law. Well, you probably know about the Burgerlijk Wetboek, given that most of you will be scholars of law in Indonesia. And what it says in there is that you have an agreement. An agreement does not only have the legal consequences agreed upon by the parties, but also those which, according to the nature of the agreement, arise from the law, custom, or the requirements of reasonableness and fairness. So you would say, like, well, if there's an agreement or a dispute, custom could be quite an important factor in deciding the outcome of what that would be. So I looked up the role of custom in court cases. You can find jurisprudence on court cases in the Netherlands on a site called rechtspraak.nl, and you can pretty much sort through it. And I made use of the work of somebody who had just done that last year, who had been carrying out an extensive search for unwritten law and codified law and so on. And he found that, well, actually, it's only 119 cases in 10 years in which this is being brought to the fore. And out of those cases, actually 103 refer to international customary law. So basically unwritten economic laws, to put it that way, trade agreements, that kind of stuff. And only 16 in 10 years pertain to events going on in the Netherlands itself, among people. And that could give the idea that custom is not very important in the Netherlands. But I do not think that that is the case. For the reasons which I just put forward, that custom also pertains to social circumstances, notions in people as to what society and life should be like. And that is something which I just briefly like to illustrate by a quite important ongoing case. You may have heard of the province of Groningen in the Netherlands. It's a province way up in the north. It's got a university, University of Groningen, where there's a fair number of Indonesians doing their PhD, as there is in Amsterdam, by the way. But importantly, Groningen is also the home, if you like, of a huge reserve of natural gas. And that gas has been discovered in the 60s. And since then, it's been pumped up, if you like, to provide gas for the Netherlands, for cooking, for heating, for the population at large. Since several years, this pumping up of gas has been associated with earthquakes in Groningen. And these earthquakes in turn have been the cause of damages to houses and buildings and of course the private properties of people. And the argument that's being put forward there is that people say, hold on, because of the gas, our houses are being ruptured and damaged. We live in an insecure environment. Well, we need compensation for the damage to the houses, and we need our situation to be more stable. So in other words, this gas pumping should not only be compensated for us, it should actually also be lessened or perhaps even stopped because it's destroying our part of the country. So this has been going on since 1986. There's been over 1,000 earthquakes, smaller ones and larger ones registered since, and it's been established that the level of the ground is sinking, which makes sense because the gas is being taken out. And you can see it on this map. This bit shows the darker bits are where the land is sinking, and you see here in Groningen that there's this huge spot where the land is going down. So there's scientific proof that this is happening. At the same time, that gas that is being pumped up here is needed for cooking and heating in the bigger cities throughout the countries. And as you may know, this part of the country is pretty much one big city. There's Amsterdam here, Haarlem, The Hague, Utrecht, Rotterdam, smaller cities in between. And it's a bit like Jabotabek in that sense. It's an agglomeration that is grown together. There's no gas here. The gas that people need here comes from Groningen. So what's happening is that at present, there has been a long and ongoing debate between people in Groningen, the national governments and the companies, especially the NAM, who are pumping up this gas. And until fairly recently, the idea was like, well, yes, but it's not really clear whether there's actually a correlation between the two, between the damage, the earthquakes and the pumping up of gas. And that led to quite a lot of frustration among the people of Groningen, the Groningers. For instance, what happened is that the gas companies said like, well, you know, these buildings are just old. If you look at these walls, these were never built to withstand earthquakes. So if then an earthquake happens, of course it means that the building is going to be damaged, but it doesn't mean that it's our fault. It just means that the building wasn't strong enough to begin with. Similarly, actually, this is interesting. Some documents pertaining to this issue show that in this discussion, the gas companies actually claimed customary law, customary rights for themselves. They said, hold on, we have been pumping up certain volumes of gas over the past decades. That means that by now that is custom. So if there are any customary rights in this discussion, it's a customary right of us, the gas companies, to continue doing what we have been doing, because we have been doing it for so long. Clearly, of course, people in Groningen did not agree. The government by now has also, national government, provincial government, taken note and has decided that gas extraction should be limited because it is so damaging. It should be supplemented via imports. And well, Ibu Valerie just already referred to Ukraine and the war in Russia. The gas that's being imported to the Netherlands is gas from Russia. So that means that at present, the discussion is, can we actually import gas from Russia? No, we shouldn't. We should stop doing that because of the war in Ukraine. Therefore, there should be more gas being pumped up in Groningen again. So here again, another example is how global conditions impact in local settings. What's been happening in Groningen as an area is actually that people there have much stronger been putting emphasis on Groningen as their identity, as their place, their custom, if you like. They say, we are people in Groningen and we have traditional rights to live in this area because we have been here for so long and so for so many centuries. And actually, it seems right now that we as Groningers are being exploited. Our land is being emptied of resources for the benefit of the rest of the Netherlands. We're not really getting anything back from that. And this notion as people in Groningen holding a right to land and resources, even if it's no official right, even if it's no legal right, but the tradition, a notion of being part of this area and as such, having a right to live there securely, safely, and on a par with other people in the Netherlands in terms of justice, is something that sits there very strongly. So the discussion now is putting forward this notion that the rights in Groningen are being violated by companies and pretty much by the rest of the Netherlands because they keep using the gas. And then the question, of course, is this customary law? And you could say, well, from a legal perspective, we're not talking about customary law because this does not pertain to agreements in such a way as the Burgerlijk Wetboek means them to be. But if you look at the issue and at the arguments being put forward, it comes very close to how custom is being seen in a societal sense and to how rights are being built and derived from this idea that custom is actually something that shapes a society. And just to very briefly make a comparison, part of my own research deals with mining and open mining pits in Kalimantan, especially in East Kalimantan. And what you see there is that when a mining company leaves an area, they leave these pits open. They should fill them in, they should make them safe, but quite often they do not. And what we see, if we look at this, is that it's quite often local people who say, like, hold on, we have a right to this land, we have a right to safe and security existence here. And we see that, well, this is not being respected or not being regarded. What we see is that even though adat has a position in Indonesian law, and actually it comes to the fore in quite a lot of elements of Indonesian law, it does not seem to do very much in establishing actual legal security. We see sometimes that adat communities get indemnifications, compensations, but quite often these are symbolic. They say, for instance, like, well, you damaged our land and the adat fine for that is, let's say, 5 piring. And that could be 5 million rupiah perhaps, or 10 million rupiahs. But even if it's a symbolic indemnification in terms of financial value, it's nothing, it's peanuts. So interestingly, what we see in Kalimantan or in Indonesia perhaps is that adat is being seen as a ground for rights and is being recognized as such in the law, but not so much in practice. Whereas if you look at, well, custom in the Netherlands, it has very little legal standing when it comes to cases such as those in Groningen, but it is actually being listened to because of the societal debate. So in terms of development, and that is important, I think, here, what I like to put forward by both the case of Groningen and this case of Kalimantan, elements like this, the exploitation of natural resources for the benefit of, let's say, a national economy, companies, will quite often be at the disadvantage of local communities. And then it becomes very important to consider what rights these people have, what positions they are in, how their equity can be guaranteed in relation to the rest of society. And custom seems to play a rather more important role in this than is often being perceived. And two reasons for that, I think. One is because custom is being seen as a legal category only, which means that people look at what does it say in the law. And okay, if it says this or that in the law, then that is how things are. Second, it's not necessarily the case that when something is in the law, that is also what happens in practice. Society, social relations can be quite different. And the balance between these two, what does the law say and what do people do? And what does that result in for the people being confronted by the effects of such natural resource exploitation? That is the balance, which I think is a balance that is really in need of more of our attention. Yeah, so just very briefly to give you a bit of a schematic background of what I have just been saying. If you look at the comparison between the legal position of custom in the two countries, you see that it is stronger in Indonesia than it is in the Netherlands. You see that the conflicts are fairly similar actually going on in both in Groningen and in Kalimantan. You see that when you look at the notions of identity coming to the fore and the broader discussions that sits between them, those are also quite similar. Other communities in Indonesia refer to injustice and refer to human rights and refer to destruction of nature. And that's exactly what people in Groningen are doing as well. So custom in itself is based in these much broader discussions, or you could say custom is just one way in which these discussions are being versed. But if we only look at custom as that little tiny word, that legal category, we're going to miss the broader implications of what such an element means in terms of development. Now, one thing that I like to do with this is actually put out an invitation. I've just been saying that, well, we should not be purely looking at custom as a legal ground only. We should look beyond the fact that it's being considered as something that is outdated, that pertains to small communities living way out in the forest. Even if it's not a legal category per se, as a social category, it is a factor in the lives of people. And given that law is there to regulate the lives of people, people will or will not accept the law as useful, true, fair, depending on how it fits in their perceptions and their notions of what life, society, and their place within it will be. So my argument is that if we're studying custom, we should go beyond legal categories, and we should go and look at these broader issues and see how people in such circumstances make sense of what they consider custom to be. And then I was thinking, who should be doing this? And I feel like, well, it would actually be really interesting. So this is where my invitation sits, for Indonesian researchers to take this up for two reasons. First, Indonesia has a broad knowledge, a broad reference, if you like, of studies on custom within Indonesia, because it's an existing legal category, because it's an ongoing societal discussion. Understandings of customs in Indonesia are much larger than they are, for instance, in the Netherlands. So what would happen if Indonesian researchers would start looking beyond Indonesia and would start looking at such issues as the one in Groningen, for instance, or similar issues when it comes to, well, say France or Spain or countries elsewhere in the world? I think it would be very refreshing for these discussions to have such voices coming in. So my final point in this is that basically I would be very happy if I would see Indonesian researchers take up this invitation and start studying custom and its place in law and society beyond Indonesia, and engaging in such debates, writing about them in broader global contexts. And I'll stop here because I think I'm out of time. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence Baker, who already gave the presentation very comprehensively. It is stated that at the first, he opened the presentations with a very intriguing statement that even though the custom is still exists in Netherlands, but the people not really paying attention about the custom value itself. But at the end of the presentations, he gave a very meaningful message that custom should be the legal ground. The conflict may share its social characteristic, and the law enforcement must not also to put the custom as the main concern for the social beings. I think that is also the organic way for the society to embrace the what has been provisions under the regulations. The next will be the third speakers, who also already kindly join us directly in here from UNODC. Mr. Faiz, would you please kindly share us about the bio of this third speaker?
Sure, Ola. Okay. The next speaker is Mr. Collier Brown. He is country manager and licensed to ASEAN United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, and he's already arrived in UPN Veteran Jakarta. Welcome, Mr. Brown. And he's sitting next to me. Okay, I would like to read the brief CV of the Mr. Brown. Mr. Collier Brown graduated from Delaware State University in the United States and did graduate studies at the State University of New York at Albany. Handling School of Criminal Justice. Mr. Brown was appointed to his current post in October 2015. He served for a period as the officer in charge, where his portfolio also included border management. This is very interesting, I guess, I believe, counter narcotics, human trafficking, and migrant smuggling, among other areas. Prior to joining UNODC in 2009, he worked in the public and private sectors in the US for over 20 years, where he managed a diversity of criminal justice assistance portfolios to states and municipalities to improve their continuum of criminal justice responses to crime. Mr. Brown, the floor is yours for the next 15 minutes. Please, Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed. His Excellency, Dr. Erna Hermarati, the rector of the University of Pembangunan, or UPN, as it's for short. His Excellency, Dr. Abdul Halim, the Dean of the Faculty of Law. His Excellency, the Head of the Law Department, Dr. Heru Sugiono, and as well as the Excellency, the Head of the Law Study Program. I think that's Dr. Tawfiq, if I might be mispronouncing some of the name. And of course, my colleague, Ms. Valerie Julian, the UN Resident Coordinator, and my colleague as well. Professor Tim Lindsey, the Malcolm Smith Chair of Asian Law at the University of Melbourne, and as well as the Honorable Mr. Lauren Bakker, Dr. Lauren Bakker, lecturer at Amsterdam University, as well as all the distinguished delegates joining us, those who are in person here, and as well as those who are online. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Let me also, I do see my good friend, Dr. Diani online, and I do want to acknowledge Dr. Diani, who has been a very, very good friend since I've been in Indonesia. So I'm pleased to see you, Dr. Diani, and thank you very much for the invitation to be with you. I'm really honored to be joining you in this very, very important conference. And I do want to acknowledge that, and as well join my colleague Valerie in congratulating you on your second anniversary of the law school. Certainly an important achievement. I want to, if I can, just take the next 10 or 12 or so minutes just to share some perspective on criminal justice reform within the context of SDG 16. You know, typically, when we talk about the SDG in the context that we do, and we talk about criminal justice reform, I think it's important to ensure that within this context, that we continue to push and to certainly acknowledge the relevance of criminal justice reform in achieving Goal 16. Certainly peace and justice, strong institutions, access to justice for all requires criminal justice systems to be fair, to be effective. And certainly I'll spend a little time this morning talking about prisons, because prisons by their very nature are closed institutions, hidden from public view, and therefore do require particular attention with regard to external scrutiny, transparency, and certainly good governance. Prisons can also be part of a more inclusive society if they are to create prospects for rehabilitation and reintegration of offenders back into society. Certainly we know that the number of people in prisons, whether on remand or serving sentences, has increased in most countries over the last 20 years, placing an enormous financial burden on governments and a significant cost to the social cohesion of societies. In too many countries, we see criminal justice systems are unfair and discriminatory, and instead of protecting society from crimes and safeguarding the rights of those who are accused and convicted, they can drive and certainly deepen poverty and hinder the social and economic progress that we certainly would expect. And so justice and prison reform should be synonymous and certainly must underpin countries' efforts to achieve Goal 16. I mean, if we really consider that a number of these goals, certainly Goal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I can certainly name a number of them, are directly impacted by how well we reform our criminal justice system to achieve Goal 16. Let me take a few minutes if we have the, do we have the PowerPoint? Oh my goodness, I forgot to. Well, I had just a few slides that I did want to, I wanted to share with you, but it looks like we may be having
some. No problem. You can just send me again, maybe. It's okay. We still have time.
Okay. Let me see if I can pull up my phone here. I wanted to take a few minutes and just, for context anyway, share some perspective on prisons as it may, and prisons within the context of criminal justice reform. I think I'll just go ahead without them. Yes, I think I'll just go ahead without them. That's fine. Within the broader context of criminal justice. And I want to start with prisons, because if we consider that prisons really is almost at the tail end of the criminal justice system. We can talk about community supervision, parole, and probation, but prisons, for the most part, is at the tail end of the criminal justice system. And we often don't talk about prisons when we talk about reforming the criminal justice system, when we talk about the broader context of Goal 16, to build and to strengthen justice institutions. And so I do want to begin there, because as I always say, prisons tend to be the emergency room of the criminal justice system, right? And whereby you may have discretion with other parts of the criminal justice system. A police officer may choose not to arrest. A prosecutor may choose not to prosecute. And a judge certainly may have some discretion in terms of the sentence that is imposed. Prisons, on the other hand, do not have those discretion, right? They have to accept everybody that is sent to them, right? And so that stream that comes into prison really is dependent on the actions and the behavior of the system prior to that. Let me just, and I'll just, if I can probably localize it a little bit here in Indonesia. I've been in Indonesia now for some time, and I've, while I think for the most part, I'm still learning. This is my 7th year in Indonesia. While I'm still learning, I think we've certainly have had a really wonderful opportunity in terms of the cooperation that we've had with the government of Indonesia across various areas. But let me take a little bit, if I can, and just to talk about some of the local context here. Of course, 34 provinces across the country, over 500 prison facilities, both prisons and detention remand facilities, approximately 270,000 prisoners, in a system that's really have a capacity for only 130,000 prisoners. So we're talking about probably around 203% capacity, overcapacity of the rated capacity. And so we do have chronic overcrowding in this space. It's also instructive when we look back at the last 3 or so years during the pandemic, where, and across the globe also, where across the globe, as a result of the pandemic, we've had countries releasing over 1 million prisoners to mitigate the impact of the pandemic within these closed institutions. Because whereas in society, and you know, as you know, some of the basic protocols that has been advanced for stemming transmission of COVID-19, in prisons, you don't have those luxuries, right? By its very nature of being overcrowded, one of the basic elements of mitigating the pandemic, social distancing, doesn't exist. And so what we've seen is a number of governments, including Indonesia, releasing large numbers of prisoners to mitigate the impact of the virus. And if I can say that, and I think Indonesia really was notable, because Indonesia, I think very early in the pandemic, took steps to release the number of prisoners. I think they've released probably somewhere around 75,000 prisoners over the even now, the pandemic is still ongoing, but over the course of the last 3 years. But what is also notable is that those releases, and when I talk about the global 1 million or so persons that have been released, what is notable is that I think those releases are really not sustainable, right? Because we certainly will see many of those individuals come back into prison. And I'll just, if I can, quote the Vice Minister of the Law and Human Rights during an event that we had, when he talked about overcapacity, right? Where he made a point that overcapacity is not the sole responsibility of the Ministry of Law and Human Rights. I'm talking about Indonesia. And that the Directorate General of Corrections only stands at the end of the criminal justice process. And therefore, addressing overcapacity needs to start from the beginning of the criminal justice process. Certainly covers legal substances and all the law enforcement aspect. But I'll also add that it's not just the responsibility of government. It's really a whole of government, and certainly a whole of society, if we are going to be successful in addressing that. From the standpoint of UNODC, we've been engaging with the government on a number of different areas, particularly around prisons. We've undertaken a series of assessment, developed various tools, working with faith professionals in prisons, certainly working with the Directorate of Corrections to implement programs that certainly manage persons in prisons. And we talk about the 3 C's, right? Care, custody, and control. And to the extent that we're able to exercise those 3 C's is certainly dependent on the ability of a prison system to have the capacity to do so. And overcrowding certainly hampers much of a system's ability to manage its prisons. When you're overcrowded, you can't do programming. There are issues of security that comes into play. I was talking to one warden who has a facility with a capacity of 90 and is housing over 1,000 people. And so I said to him, well, how do you manage that? He said, well, the only thing I do is to provide security, right? Make sure nobody escapes. Make sure that there is security within the prison. And so rehabilitation, giving people the ability to learn a skill and to return to society in a manner that they can remain in society. Those are really considerations that are not on the table because of overcrowding. And so we have undertaken a number of different cooperation with the government in terms of addressing this. We have the issue of violent extremist prisoners. There are over 500 or so violent extremist prisoners across prisons in Indonesia. And certainly that also brings a dimension of challenge to the prison system. Because I've always said, when we have a facility of 270,000 plus prisoners, while we may only have 500 or so violent extremist prisoners, the consequences of not being able to properly rehabilitate and to reintegrate those 500 people is much greater than a pickpocket. We're not talking about a pickpocket. The consequences of a person, of a violent extremist prisoners relapsing to the previous behavior is much greater than somebody, both of crime certainly, but the consequences and the implications of that is certainly much greater. And so I think it's really critical that as we talk about SDG 16, that we really begin to focus on this particular aspect of the criminal justice system. Criminal justice reform is critical if we are going to, again, create the environment where we have peace, we have security, we have the ability to rehabilitate and to reintegrate individuals. Globally, there are millions of people in prisons. In Indonesia, as I mentioned, 271,000 people who are people who at some point will return to the community. And to the extent that they return to the community a little better off than when they went in, I think it benefits the whole of society. We're talking about individuals who can contribute to the country's development, whether it's through employment and undertaking, paying taxes and so on, caring for their families and so on, certainly are opportunities where they can make those significant contributions. The most recent Crime Congress that was held in Kyoto, Japan, had a very significant focus on prisons. And not by accident, because there's a recognition that prisons as an element of the criminal justice system and without the necessary supports, without the necessary reform, will continue to perpetuate deficiencies within criminal justice systems. And so certainly, I think there are areas that as part of that reform, there are examples globally of issues of the use of technology, e-justice, for example. That was an element during the pandemic that has proven to be very invaluable, where as a result of the pandemic, where movements were not as frequent, people couldn't go to court physically, be present in court physically, where technology, video hearings, and so on became the norm, at least during this period of the pandemic. Sure. And so being able to expand on the use of e-justice, being able to expand on restorative justice. This is another aspect within Indonesia that is now an important area that is being explored, is the use of restorative justice in terms of diversion and ensuring that people who don't need to be in prison are not in prison. And so I do want to just conclude with just a few points. One is that we have to continue to find ways, political will, resources, to ensure that criminal justice is a focal part of addressing SDG 16. And I'll just end with a quote from the former Secretary General of the UN, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, who noted that there is no peace without development, and no development without peace. And there is no lasting peace or sustainable development without respect for human rights and the rule of law. And so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to share with you. And let me also thank the university for creating this platform for us to reflect and hopefully move forward towards concrete action to achieve Goal 16. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Collie Brown, for the great presentation and comprehensive presentation about the criminal justice system reform. And one of the aspects that underline here about the prison itself and the prisoner as a part of downstream of the criminal justice system reform, and how to correlate them with the inclusive aspect in the SDGs goals number 16, especially through the rehabilitation itself. For the next speaker, there will be Prof. Tim Lindsey, and I move to Ola to introduce Professor Tim Lindsey. Please, Ola.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Faiz. It's truly beautiful what we have here, the dialectics in these seminars from the significance of SDGs point 16 and having its score on human rights to the very marginalized and least being concerned people, which is the prisoner that has been addressed by Mr. Collie Brown. Thank you very much for the interesting presentations. The next speakers will be from the professors, our academicians, distinguished academicians, which is based in the Melbourne University, Professor Tim Lindsey. Yeah, he is actually the director of the Center for Indonesian Law Society, and he holds a Bachelor of Laws, Bachelor of Arts, and Bachelors of Letters from the University of Melbourne, and completed his PhD thesis in Indonesia Studies, a specialist in a wide range of aspects of Indonesian law. He also teaches and researches Sharia law in Indonesia and specified in Southeast Asia. Tim is also the barrister and was the long service chair of the Australia-Indonesia Institute until 2016. He has more than 120 publications, a very productive one. Wow. The Indonesian, his concerns, research concerns is on Indonesian constitutions, drugs law, and practice in South Asia, strangers next door, Indonesian and Australia in the Asian century. For you, Mr. Professor Tim Lindsey, time and place is given. You shall proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. It's a great pleasure to be virtually in Indonesia, in Jakarta, one of my favorite cities. I really hope after almost 3 years to be able to get back to Indonesia very soon. So thank you again for your kind invitation and introduction. Congratulations to the university for its very important day today. Selamat. So talking about, I'm just going to share my screen with you. Talking about the Sustainable Development Goals 16, Peace, Justice and Strong Institutions, which you're very familiar with, it's just been discussed. These are not easy objectives to achieve. Very few countries have ever been able to fully realize them anywhere in the world. But today I want to be very specific in talking about this. I want to examine Indonesia's progress towards achieving these two aspects of Goal 16 by a criminal case study involving an actual case that I've researched with LBH Masyarakat, an NGO well known to many people in Indonesia, and with my daughter, Samira Lindsey, who is also a lawyer. So this case study, I hope, will illustrate to you the practical problems of achieving the rule of law at national and international levels and equal access to justice for all, and in particular, effective accountability and transparent institutions. So this case study relates to a man, Sakak bin Jumak, who was a poor, uneducated farmer. And in 1995, the Tembilahan District Court in Riau sentenced him to death for the murder of another villager and his wife and child. In September that year, he was transferred to Cipinang prison, where he was placed on death row to await execution by firing squad. He filed 2 clemency applications that were rejected. He remained on death row for the next quarter of a century, more, in fact, 27 years in all, waiting for an execution that never took place. Like many other prisoners left on death row for years, his mental and physical health deteriorated severely over time, including due to death row syndrome. 2 decades after he was convicted, LBH-M began to represent Sakak. But in July 2020, they were told by the prison that he died in custody, still on death row, still waiting for execution due to malnutrition and limited access to medical services as a result of the pandemic. His family couldn't afford to buy him, and his body was disposed of by the prison authorities. There must be serious doubts about whether he was guilty of these crimes, or at least the level of his involvement in the murders. But as I will show, these doubts were not addressed at all during the criminal process he was subject to, due to repeated failures to respect his rights at Indonesian law. These failures included a lack of proper legal representation, an unfair trial, a lack of provision of interpretation, and other problems as well. Even if he did commit the crimes alleged, his punishment, being left in limbo on death row for over a quarter of a century, grossly exceeded what was appropriate. In all, his sad case raises important questions about the fairness and integrity of the criminal justice system, and in particular, the capital punishment regime. It raises questions about how to achieve the SDG Goals 16 criteria of rule of law, rights to equal access to justice, and whether criminal justice institutions are effective and transparent. So let me explain this to you, or demonstrate this to you by taking you through a series of rights that he had at Indonesian law that were ignored or marginalized from the day of his arrest until his death. The first is the right to documentation. A full understanding of what happened to him is made difficult because records are simply missing, particularly regarding the pre-trial process he went through. You can see on the slide I've put up there the relevant provisions of the Indonesian Criminal Procedure Code, KUHP, which states that at the request of the suspect or legal advisor, a copy of his police examination or interrogation must be provided to the defence. This obviously operates to assist accused persons to help them prepare their trial, to know what the allegations against them. However, the police report is only provided if a formal request is made, and that request is often ignored. And even if it is provided, it often does not contain a true and complete record of questioning. Article 143 adds that copies of the letter submitting the case, together with the letter of indictment, have to be provided to the suspect or his legal advisor. At the same time, the submission letter is given to the court. Now, this letter includes the indictment, the case file, and its submission to the court leads to the case being set down for trial. And this provision is meant to ensure, again, that the defence can prepare a proper defence. But Sakak and his lawyer were never given copies of the police investigation report, which presumably contained the confession that the court relied on. Copies of the investigation report and the police submission letter to the court have never been located. Sakak also never received a copy of the decision of the court by which he was sentenced to death. Article 226 of the code is relevant here, and it says that it must be provided if it's requested, which is somewhat at odds with the law in the general courts, which said it must be provided in any case within 14 days. However, whatever the two laws say, he was never given a copy of the judgment. In fact, the court has lost a copy of the judgment. One was finally located in the hands of an elderly clerk, and that became the only record available of Sakak's arrest, questioning, and trial. But like many Indonesian court decisions, it's of limited value in understanding what happened because of Article 1971 of the Code, which does not require the arguments of the defence to be included in the decision. So the judgment in his case gave the defence case just a couple of sentences. The right to legal advice exists under Indonesian law. It is contained in Article 54 of the Criminal Code, which says that a suspect or defendant has a right to legal assistance at every level, from arrest through to trial. In practice, however, these rights are weak, and many people detained by police have no lawyer present during questioning because the police do not tell them about this right, even though they're obliged to. Likewise, some detainees are threatened by police, and so they refuse legal assistance even if it's offered. But in some cases, including in death penalty cases, the presence of legal counsel is mandatory. Article 56(1) makes this absolutely clear. Article 56(2) adds that legal advisors will be provided free of charge to a suspect or a defendant, but KUHAP does not deal with how that free court-appointed lawyer will be paid for their legal services. This is obviously a disincentive for lawyers the court appoints for defendants. And as M. Yaya Harahap, a well-known Indonesian legal scholar and former judge, has said, it means that the quality of representation provided by these effectively unpaid lawyers is very low. Even if an experienced legal advisor is available, it's not clear that they can assist. Article 1151 of KUHAP says that the legal advisor could only follow the course of the examination by watching and listening to the examination. And that effectively means the lawyer can only be passive. They can't actually advise the client or intervene. And it's the case that very often lawyers simply attend the police questioning without saying or doing anything. Some people questioned by police are even unaware that the person present is their lawyer. At the end of questioning, the accused is asked to sign legal assistance minutes. And this is to be provided to the judge at trial to show that the lawyer attended the accused questioning. However, the accused's signature on those minutes does not necessarily mean he or she actually received any assistance. It may just mean that the lawyer was there and was silent. In Sakak's case, the Indonesian legal language statement signed by him with a fingerprint was presented to the court as evidence of his confession to the crimes. There has to be great doubt as to the validity of this document for two reasons. First of all, it was obtained by the police without Sakak being legally represented, even though it was a death penalty case. Secondly, Sakak could not possibly have understood the contents because he was illiterate and could not speak Bahasa Indonesia. He could only speak a local language and was given no interpreter. So he could not read or understand the document. He had no legal advisor present. He had no idea what was in that document. Sakak also says, of course, that the confession was obtained through the use of physical force, which is not uncommon and was particularly common under Suharto's new order at the time he was arrested when the police were part of the armed forces. Of course, it's prohibited by Article 52 of KUHAP, but that really has no impact. Returning to this question of the right to an interpreter, Article 51 states that a suspect has a right to be informed in a language he understands or she understands about what has been presumed and the charges against him or her. And the judge, under Article 177 of KUHAP, shall appoint an interpreter if the defendant or witness does not understand. So it's up to the judge to appoint the interpreter. But in practice, they don't do so unless they're requested by a prosecutor or a defense lawyer. There's no test to determine whether the accused is eligible to receive an interpreter. And again, the interpreter is not paid. And there have been cases where the interpreters work unpaid or whether students from universities have volunteered, including in death penalty cases. Again, Sakak could not speak Indonesian. All the proceedings were conducted in Indonesian. He was never given an interpreter. In other words, his right to be clearly informed of the allegations against him in a language he understood was completely ignored throughout the whole process that led to his finding himself on death row. Indonesian laws do not explicitly establish a right to a fair trial. Under the Constitution, there is a right to legal recognition, guarantees protection and certainty and equal treatment. And the Constitutional Court has said that the rule of law means due process is imperative, but these are not guarantees of a fair trial. And there is no judicial remedy for a failure to respect a constitutional right. You can ask for a statute to be struck down as contrary to the Constitution, but you cannot enforce a constitutional right, so it is meaningless. Some statutes do contain procedural safeguards, although there is no clear statement of a right of silence and no clear statement of a right to a fair trial. There is a presumption of innocence, and the prosecution must prove its case. But again, these are not the same as a right to a fair trial. Sakak could have appealed his conviction by taking the case to the Riau High Court, but he had 7 days to do so and his lawyer did not lodge an appeal. There was still a right to reconsideration by the Supreme Court, but his lawyer did not apply for reconsideration. That left Sakak with only one remedy, which was clemency. An unknown person, probably his trial lawyer, filed a clemency application on his behalf just a few days after the appeal deadline expired. This suggests he had made a decision to simply abandon Sakak's right to appeal and rely solely on clemency. It's not clear why this happened, but filing the clemency application marked an end point to the judicial process. By abandoning appeal and reconsideration in the Supreme Court, there was no more judicial process once the clemency application had been filed. So the lawyer had no further responsibility to Sakak, and that may have been a motivating factor for a court-appointed lawyer who was probably not paid for his or her services. And this is supported by the fact that the application, the clemency application, which was signed with just a fingerprint, was a single page with only 4 lines of argument. The clemency was rejected in 2000. In 2000. And 2 years later, a second clemency application was filed, again, a very short one. No one knows who filed it because all the documents have disappeared. But this time, the clemency application was accompanied by a letter from Dr. Albert Hasibuan of Komnas HAM. And he said that his investigation showed that Sakak claimed he was innocent but had been poorly represented by a lawyer provided by the state at his trial and had not been provided with a copy of his judgment in the case or other documents and had been unable to appeal. The Supreme Court ordered an investigation into it. No one knows what came from that investigation, nothing apparently. And LBHM was finally told by government officials that the application was rejected by President Megawati, but again, the presidential decision was never given to Sakak, despite the fact that Article 12 of the Clemency Law says this has to be done within 14 days. In fact, Megawati's decision has also been lost, never found, has never been produced. This is significant because Article 13 of the Clemency Law says that a prisoner on death row who has applied for clemency cannot be executed until he or she receives a presidential decision rejecting the application. And if that has been lost or disappeared, like in this case, the prisoner simply waits on death row, getting physically and mentally sicker and sicker, as did Sakak, 27 years until he died. The flawed legal process I've just described to you that led to this man being convicted, sentenced to death and left to die on death row is a reminder of the problems of the administration of criminal justice in Indonesia. And I'm finishing up with this slide. Regardless of guilt or innocence, individuals like Sakak have very limited capacity to enforce their rights and obtain procedural and substantively fair treatment from the law enforcers. And so they are very vulnerable to abuse and neglect. For Indonesia to move closer to achieving Sustainable Development Goal 16 by fulfilling the rule of law and the right to equal justice for all and ensuring its criminal justice institutions are effective, accountable and transparent, basic criminal law reforms are needed, including clear and effective remedies for breaches of procedural rules in KUHP, the criminal code, including penalties for those who breach them, clear rights to legal representation, provision of legal documents and interpreters, and penalties for those who breach them. Clear rules about public funding and resources for state-provided lawyers and interpreters are required. New rules of evidence are required to prevent courts using evidence obtained from investigations where procedural rules have been broken, like Sakak's confession in the language he didn't understand, and which was never translated to him, which he had no idea what was in it. Reform of the clemency law is also important to create procedures for the president in making the decision, and again, a reliable process for determining the outcome for prisoners. Above all, a constitutional guarantee of a procedurally and substantively fair trial is needed. And if not constitutional, then at least a strong statement in legislation of that, with a clear right to judicial relief if that right is violated, and penalties for those who violate it. Finally, I'll just add one thing, that the pra-peradilan system also needs reform. I haven't had a chance to discuss that today, but that's also important in this case. Finally, prisoners who've been left on death row for more than 10 years should have their sentences commuted to life or 20 years, as the Constitutional Court proposed. Some of the reforms I've just described are in fact in draft bills to reform KUHAP and the Criminal Code that has been before the DPR many times. But not all these reforms are, and they are all urgently needed, and they must be enforced for Indonesia to bring its criminal justice system up to date and to fulfill Sustainable Development Goal 16. So with that, I'll finish, and thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, Professor Tim Lindsey. That's a really thoughtful and comprehensive presentations we have. And indeed, your suggestions is truly in time, because we are in the middle of restructuring again our KUHP, and that was a really comprehensive suggestions that you have been brought up. As to sum up, I will gonna brief out that Professor Tim Lindsey have presented that the rule of law implementations require more just approachment. Fair trial, judicial remedy should be put forward on the Indonesian law enforcement. As he conclude that, or maybe he put into question, SDG 16 is still in a distant goal. Are we on track? Are we off track? Well, it truly depends on how the law will be reformed immediately soon. Clear and effective remedies, stronger rights to legal representations, clear rules and public funding, new rules of evidence, and reformations on the clemency law are truly significant to build up a more justified rule of law in Indonesia. Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor Tim Lindsey. And I think we come at the end of the seminar today. What do you think about this seminar, Bapak Faiz?
This is very interesting seminar. I believe there's a lot of perspective about the detail of the SDGs goals number 16 from the perspective of Madam Valerie Julian, especially try to underline about the importance of the SDG 16 and how it correlate with the across sustainable level other goals in the SDGs, and as well as what Mr. Collie Brown underlined also about the criminal justice system reform, and one of the aspect is about the prison and prisoner, which correlate with the inclusive aspect that through rehabilitations. And also the from Mr. Dr. Lauren Becker, that very interesting about talking about the customary law, and this is one of the issues that have been talked by one NGO alliance in Indonesia, especially in advocating the bill of customary communities in the Indonesian Parliament House, and as well as what Professor Tim Lindsey underlined about the case of Sakak bin Jumak. Yeah, I remember about also about the case of Marcus Patasambo and as well as Ruben Patasambo, that have a similar situation. They are also has had the improper situation of fair trial, and has faced about improper justice system, and they also in queue line for death rows, even though that there is a key witness that they are not the murderer. So I guess it's quite interesting the discussion today, Ola. We're going to provide. We're going to deliver to the floor for a Q&A.
Yeah. So I think there have been several questions here in the column chat. Or maybe we will give the floor first to raise hand if there are any attendants maybe would like to directly giving an
There is
opinion.
one.
Yeah.
From Pak Ahmad Asin.
Okay. Okay, Pak Ahmad Asin, the floor is yours.
Digunakan untuk membangun rumah susun. Thank you very much for giving me opportunity to ask a question. I think it is interesting what saying by the Madam Valerie Julian. I think today you have great quotation. We are equal because we have same right.
Kayaknya ada suara, gangguan suara itu, Era.
Dilarang oleh undang-undang.
Okay. We know that the number 5 of SDGs is to achieve gender equality, empower all women and girls. So the SDG number 5 to aim to grant women and girls equal right, opportunities to live free without discrimination, including workplace discrimination or any violence. And here's my question to Madam Valerie Julian. What are challenges you face in doing your job as UN resident coordinator you want to do, especially to achieve gender equality in country with patriarchal culture society like Indonesia? Thank you.
Hadirin sekalian, saya lihat Dato' Zulfi, ada tadi Pak Endang, dan juga yang lain. Kita harus mencoba memanfaatkan.
Aurora, ada suara-suara lain.
Yeah, I think it's come from the background sound from the question, Bapak Asin, but I think it's okay. We can handle. We grab the content, and if I'm not mistaken, is it Mrs. Valerie still here?
I don't think so.
Okay, if so, then maybe Mr. Collie Brown
can. The question though.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, Bapak Asin, can you please summarize the questions? Because I think, yeah.
Okay.
And also, maybe could you just
I would like to repeat my question.
Move far away from the noise. We have some noise in here.
Okay.
Yeah, very sorry.
Yeah, here's my question to Madam Valerie Julian. What are challenges you face in doing your job as UN resident coordinator you want to do, especially to achieve gender equality and in country with patriarchal culture society like Indonesia? Is that clear, my question?
Yeah, thank you, sir. So, yeah, okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so basically, Mr. Asin was questioning the up and downs that you are dealing in United Nations, especially in regards to the gender issues. So what are the deals there? What are the problems, and how the UN committee cope up with the problems that is continually or happens? What are the obstacles anyway? Yeah, and how do you cope with that? In speaking of the gender issues.
let me see if I can let me see if I can take the question on. It looks like Valerie is left. I know she said she had some other commitments afterwards, so she's probably left. But look, you know, this is my third country since I've joined the UN. I joined the UN in 2009, as you mentioned, and each country, I think the issue of gender is a prevailing issue in every country that I've been in. It's an issue that the UN has been highlighting and taking efforts in specific countries in terms of addressing. Here in Indonesia, I think, you know, the complexity of Indonesia in terms of legislation, so on. We just saw the landmark sexual assault bill that was just passed. The issue of how we address disparities in gender issues, I think one has to look at it from the standpoint of to what extent are we really making a commitment to addressing that. We see to what extent we are giving opportunities for women, particularly so, to work, for women to have education. We see disparities across countries, right? We see countries that tend to be much more restrictive in terms of girls' education and so on and so forth. Here in Indonesia, I think the environment exists where I think at least some enabling environment exists, but I think certainly there has to be the commitment to ensure that legislations and so on that are in place are implemented. I mean, we know that there are a number of and I think most people would agree that there are a number of pieces of legislation in place, very good legislation, I might add. If you even just look at the Kayawapa that was just being discussed by Professor Lindsey, we see language in these pieces of legislation that are very good language in many instances, but it's implementation, I think, which has always been called into question. There are certainly complexities here that I've often seen and experienced, but certainly I think it really is, it comes down to the will in many instances to provide and to enforce the regulations, to ensure that laws are being enforced and implemented, so to speak, around these issues.
Yeah. The question is really relevant, yeah, Mr. Faiz, because we are just legalize the sexual violence law here, and then I think it may be correlated. So what's the suggestions maybe from Professor Tim Lindsey or Professor Lawrence Baker, how the access to legal enforcement, to the law, to the rule of law itself could be inclusive in terms of the gender bias, yeah, especially when we talk about the procedure of law. I don't think it's quite favorable for women, especially when we are talking about the sexual violence. Maybe is there any additional statement from you, additional answer maybe from you, Mr. Lawrence Baker and Professor Tim Lindsey? What is your opinion about the gender issues in regards of the rule of law, in regards of the legal procedures in Indonesia?
Do you mean specifically as regards gender or generally?
Yeah, specifically in terms of maybe women's rights, yeah, towards the legal procedure.
I'll just say briefly that I think there are two issues here. One is the law and its actual content, what it says, and the second is the extent to which law is actually enforced and applied, and law enforcement, but also by the question of whether there are penalties for not enforcing the law. One of the problems within Indonesian law, particularly in the criminal field, is that whilst it sets out procedures and processes for law enforcers, it generally doesn't make very clear what the penalties are for non-compliance with those processes and procedures. So it's one thing to amend the law, and what is the recently passed law is a great step forward. It's not a gift to women, as Puan Maharani said, it is a right for women to which they're entitled. But it's a great step forward. And I hope that in time, KUHP, the Criminal Procedure Code, will also be amended along with the criminal code itself, although there are problems there because some of the amendments are good, some of them are very bad. I'm not sure that the draft is right. But even if a good draft reform, a good draft comes before the DPR and is passed for both the Criminal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code, it still leaves aside the question of whether the laws are actually applied in practice. And that relates to the culture surrounding law enforcement, the inherited impunity, which is a long-established tradition. And it's not easy to change that. Of course, you can engage in training, you can engage in education. That's important, it has to happen. But even that's not enough on its own. There's been a lot of money spent on a lot of training for the police that has been, particularly in relation to gender awareness. Some of it has been effective in very small areas, but generally speaking, it has not been effective. So it's a difficult path, and it's going to take more than a law or a new set of training programs to change practices that are deeply embedded in a criminal injustice system, particularly for the poor, because many of the rights that legislation grants are really available to those who can pay for them, whether that's formally or informally. And their rights are never really available to the very poor. It's a knife in the Indonesian expression that is sharp downwards and blunt upwards. And that's where the socioeconomics of Indonesia's two economies, extreme wealth and extreme poverty, obstruct law reform. So it's not easy.
Perhaps there's one element to add to this still also, and that's the element of accessibility of the law. Imagine if you're a person who has been the victim of a crime. That means you need to step up and either move to the police or get yourself a lawyer, go to the court, which means that you have to understand basically how to access a court or have the funds to contact a lawyer, or simply be brave enough, if that's the word, to step up to the police and ask them to act on your behalf. And what it echoes a bit what Tim Lindsey just said. There are two different economies running in this perspective, and in earlier research myself, I also encountered people when I asked them, like, well, why do you engage with Preman rather than with the police? They said, well, if we ask the police to do something, they will ask us to pay them, and then they will not do anything. But if we ask Preman, yeah, we need to pay them as well, but they will do something. So strictly speaking, it's a question of access, of confidence, and if you like, of the being sure that the law will actually be applied for you.
Yeah, I can't help but add something up there as well. Thank you, Lawrence. Which is that the pra peradilan is a classic example of this. If you're in custody and you want to apply for a pre-trial hearing, you have to do it through the police. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought, yeah. Okay. Ibu Diani, maybe, do you have any question?
Yes. I would like to address my question to Pak Tim. Hi, Pak Tim. Long
Hello.
time to see, Pak.
Yes. Good to see you.
And you're so different now with the beard.
I'm trying to get credibility.
Okay, Pak Tim. I think this is it was very interesting to to hear your presentation about the Sakak case. Yeah, and I believe that when I was in Bapanas, I think we have a lot of cooperation how to support the Indonesian government in terms of the access to justice. So I think this is many cases that Indonesia face in terms of the access to justice, like the Sakak case. So since that Indonesia commitment in terms of to implement the SDGs, especially for the goal 16, and especially for the goal 16.3. So how do you see the challenge for Indonesia about the implementation? Like, I think that the head of the police, like Pak Sulistyo, now is very keen to apply the what we call the restorative justice. And I think a recent case that about the I didn't remember the name, but how the victim defends himself and by killing the two bad guy, for example, that I said that, but the police release the guy that in the name of the self-defense. So I think this is very interesting that it depends on the political commitment of the head of the police in terms of the how they apply the access to justice and also the restorative justice. My question that in terms of the goal 16, how do you see that Indonesia challenge? Beside that, we have a big homework in terms of the KUHP, but I think for other laws that also related with how the people can get the access to justice. How do you see the challenge for in terms of for the goal 16? And the second one, my question is to Pak Lawrence Baker, because I think it's also interesting about the customary law, because I think you know better in Indonesia system that what we call the customary law with the adat law, or how that we put in our constitution as the local wisdom. So since that we Indonesia also give a commitment in terms of the goal system, goal 16. So and also we you know, it's better that some of regions in Indonesia also still applied very strongly of the adat law, like in Bali, like in Maluku. So do you agree that or do you convince that Indonesia can still apply the what do you call the adat law or customary law or local wisdom? And I believe that if we apply the adat law, it depends on how strong the value of the people apply the adat law. When the people apply the adat law, so the national law will be I don't say that it's a weakness, but the stronger applying of the adat law is there in the terms of the adat people. So do you think that based on your experience, because you give the example about in the East Kalimantan, that the challenges for the Indonesia in terms of the goal 16, and what do you think that the role of the university? Because I think that until now, if I'm not mistaken, there are 26 universities that already built the SDG center. Because I think the role of the university is very important to bridging from the national policy to the local policy, and also how the role of the university also can help to implement the SDGs implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Diani, for the questions. That's a very critical one. Professor Tim Lindsey and also Professor Lawrence Baker. Maybe you could answer Ibu Diani questions. Maybe we could start from Bapak Tim Lindsey. You're still muted. You are still muted, sir.
I just committed a Zoom crime by speaking while still muted. Yeah, thank you very much, Ibu Diani, for your questions, which were quite a good summary of the situation. But I just say again that there are so many things that need to be changed, and simply reforming laws or engaging in training for legal enforcers, law enforcers, none of those things are enough on their own. They're all important. They all have to be done, but none of them are enough on their own. And it's in the end about changing the attitudes of those in power towards criminal justice. And that is not a simple path. It hasn't happened yet. I think a great deal of care needs to be taken in the course of legislative reform, because in order to pass good laws, sometimes you're forced to compromise and pass bad laws, and that should not be allowed to happen in Indonesia, because there are already too many bad laws on the books. I think the principal problem is at the moment that where a law is ignored or set aside or distorted or manipulated by law enforcers, there very often is no penalty. Whether that's police or whether it's corrupt lawyers or whether it's judges or whether it's prosecutors, it's very unusual that they suffer a penalty, or indeed that the prosecution of an accused person is halted or dismissed because a procedural law or protection has been breached. And I think we have a lot of laws that don't really have any force or meaning. And I think that's a fundamental problem, that there needs to be consequences of breach of laws. You need good laws, you need new culture and new training, and you need to have actual consequences of breach of laws. There's nothing revolutionary about that, but it's very difficult to achieve, and it will likely take a long time. And I think you have to be realistic about that.
Thank you. Thank you,
Do you have any additional answers? Bapak Lawrence Baker, maybe you would like to add something?
Yes, I do. Thank you for those questions, Ibu Diani. They're seriously comprehensive, I think. Your first question as to the role of adat within a nation. I have to say that I always find that a rather confusing and difficult issue myself, because of course it would mean that if within a nation which has national law, you have specific communities adhering to other law, that would mean that all of a sudden you would have legal pluralism within that one specific nation. And that does not in itself have to be a problem if that adat law is not conflicting with the national law, but imagine that it is. Or imagine that it means that people adhering to the adat law feel that they have certain rights which other citizens would not have because they're not part of that community, even if they live in the same place. Then you end up in a fairly complex situation, in which the question is, could it be that people of one community have more rights or higher rights or better rights or different rights than other people who are not part of that community, but nevertheless citizens of the same state? So I guess that when it comes to talking about adat law, in itself, it's not necessarily problematic if it's not conflicting with national law, speaking from a legal perspective, but of course, from a societal perspective, that can be different. People in Bali, for instance, can be quite upset about immigrants moving into Bali and buying land or starting to live in Bali or taking jobs or which they feel by or which perhaps by Adat are the domain of the Balinese. Or at least I'm not at World Home in Bali, but I know these things happening in Kalimantan. But if we don't speak of Adat as law, because I think that would be definitely the legal dimension, but the notion of Adat rights, which is the other bit of it, then I feel that sometimes it can be useful. For instance, when we're speaking about communities in Kalimantan who lose their lands to plantations, often these communities have no proven rights to the lands. They may have a history of living there for, I don't know, decades, perhaps generations, but if that has never been written down, if they have no official land rights, then that means that formally speaking, of course, they have no ground to make any claim. However, if Adat in such a case is a ground, that would help them to at least put some claim forwards towards the legal system in showing that, look, we may not have any of the certificates or the official recognitions that are actually required, but according to our tradition and our way of life, we have been here for a very long time. We state a claim based on that tradition or that Adat to this area. So that is not the same as saying that Adat is a law, rather saying that Adat can be a source of rights, which is two different ways of looking at it and dealing with it. But I concur with you that having Adat law within a nation can be difficult, and it is. But I do feel that considering Adat as a source of rights can at times be useful. And your second question as to the role of universities in spreading the SDGs, I think you're spot on there. It is one thing that universities can be very good at or can be very useful for. In my own university, what I find is that the trick usually is to find where the SDGs fit in the curriculum. And it is not something with us that is compulsory for all students to know about. We don't have special centers for it, but we teach, for instance, various courses on development and SDGs certainly are introduced there. And then if students want to know more about them or want to have specialized courses, then they generally either take those in another department. But on the whole, I think if you consider that universities train students for jobs in government, in what have you, at least in influential positions at some point, it helps that if you want to create consciousness of the SDGs, that you do so through universities. I quite agree.
Thank you, Dr. Lornbreaker, as well as Prof. Tim Lindsey for the comprehensive answers for Ibu Diani. So there are two more questions, I guess. The first one is come from...
I have to pamit.
Okay, all right, Prof. Tim Lindsey. Thank you very much for your participation in this seminar.
Thank you very much. Tim.
Terima
See
kasih.
you.
Terima kasih.
Sehat ya.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
See you soon.
May I have one question?
Okay.
Question from the floor.
Yes. May I read first the question
Yes,
from
short time.
Bapak Guntarto Widodo from the University of Pamulang. So he is already mentioned in the chat room. He would like, but however, Prof. Tim Lindsey has already left. Okay. So perhaps Mr. Bram, may you answer about the question from the Mr. Guntarto Widodo about the question that he would like to ask about what is the problem solving in order to fulfill the lack of rights of the accused. So the lack of rights, such as like a lack of interpreter, free lawyers in terms of the criminal justice system.
I'm not a lawyer, certainly, but we do quite a bit around the issue of access to justice and the rule of law and so on. And if I understand the question is, what do you do about people not getting access to lawyers or access to interpreters, free legal counsel, and so on. These are all things that are clearly in the law. And the point I made earlier is, how do you ensure that the law is being implemented and enforced as it is written? And how do you hold people accountable for not adhering and upholding those provisions within the law? Is also, I think, important for and the point that was raised regarding the I think Mr. Saka, who had that case. I think part of it is, how do you also hold the court accountable to ensuring that defendants' rights are being followed. I was in Afghanistan for a number of years, and I had a friend of mine who was practicing law in Afghanistan, and she was the only foreigner actually who had been admitted to the bar in Afghanistan and was practicing law. And one of the things that she was very effective at doing as a legal advocate is understanding the law and holding the court, the prosecutors accountable to following those aspects of the law. And that's where she prevailed many times in court, was actually going in front of them and said, your law says this, or your law says that, right? And holding them accountable to that. Because oftentimes we know, yes, there are things enshrined in the law, but is not being followed, even and blatantly in many instances may not be followed as it is written on paper. And I think part of that is really, how do we provide the level of accountability in those spaces to ensure that defendants' rights are being followed and adhered to.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And I guess it can fulfill to answer the question from Mr. Guntarto Widodo. For the next
Thank you very much.
For the next question, I will move to Ola again. There is one person raised hand, Miss Furi Rahmawati.
Hello.
Please mention to whom the question will be delivered.
Thank you for the opportunity. I will make it quick. I think this question for all the speakers who want to answer. Last year I worked with UNDP Indonesia and UNDP Istanbul, also ISDB, for create a program for CSO in Jakarta to empower CSO to building CSO capacities and bring the change for the country. And my question, does the regulation meet what CSO needs? Because we know the CSO, one of the objects that can implement the SGD. Thank you.
Is there any specific speaker that you would like to ask? I mean, this is for Mr. Collie Brown as well as to Dr. Lauren Beckers.
Anyone, everyone.
Okay. Oh, everyone. Okay. So I would like to invite Dr. Lauren Becker first to perhaps to give the opinion for the answer. Please, Dr. Lauren Becker.
Thank you, Bu Furi. I'm afraid I'm not quite clear yet as what the question is.
What exactly is CSO? Maybe Ibu Furi, you can start from there.
CSO in Indonesia is a non-profit organization.
All right. You mean whether there's a role for non-profit organizations?
NGO.
Does the regulation meet what NGO CSO need? Because we know that they are one of the objects that can implement the SGD.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, the connection was a bit poor, so that's why I didn't catch it.
Okay,
but yes, I believe there can certainly be a role for such organizations. The tricky bit, if there is one, is of course that non-governmental organizations, tend to be in the public arena, to put it that way, in a position that puts them on two sides. On the one hand, they generally need to show an independence and neutrality, if you like, specifically vis-a-vis larger corporations or government if they take a more critical stance. On the other hand, they largely depend on public support or sometimes government funding to actually carry out or bring forward the message that they need to bring or that they want to bring. Having said that, what we see in the Netherlands is that whereas Dutch government verbally and in writing committed to furthering the SDGs, they're doing very little. And that is in part because if you start carrying out the SDGs, that impacts the economy, and impacting the economy has political consequences. So it seems that government is somewhat loath to actually act. It's largely non-governmental organizations here which pressure, if you like, government into actually acting. So in that sense, yes, I do believe that non-governmental organizations can have an important role here, though perhaps that is not the role that you had in mind, but it is one that I see being quite effective in the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence Baker, for the answer. I think Ibu Furi questions will be the last questions due to the time.
Not for me.
Yeah.
Aurora. Just 1 minute, 2 minutes.
Okay. But yeah, okay. Could you be concise? Yeah, could you be concise,
Okay.
Bapak Sinjar?
Okay, thank you very much. And I am very glad to meet you, Aura. I come late, but come late is better than never, okay? Law enforcement, that's very nice to hear. Justice for all, equity, and so on. Very, very good to listen, yeah? But that's very difficult to make reality, yeah? I want to ask the presenters about what is the comparison of your countries. Like Indonesia, I see the problem in Indonesia for law enforcement is our integrative of our apparatus of, for example, some of them of law of law force is very, very weak. And also sometimes low product, yeah, still many from apa namanya demonstration. It means there is problem, and juga implementation of the fundament of the failure. For example, Pancasila still not to make to hand it. See, this is. I ask you, what is the problem, the factor, especially every country, to make obstacle for law enforcement? And the second, about the customary law.
I think that would be enough, Pak Sinjar.
Okay.
Yeah, because due to of the time.
That's
so
right.
Yeah, to concise. Yeah, could you please just have a sharing session, maybe Bapak Lawrence Baker and Bapak Collins, if we go back to your originate country, what are the challenge compared to Indonesia? Are we facing a similar issues, or do you have any particular suggestions that maybe your country has embraced or has been cope with the struggles? Do you have any advice? Yeah, feel free to answer, Bapak Baker and Bapak Collins.
Wow, thank you for the question, Bapak Sinjar. Actually, that's a question, that's a seminar in itself, I think. I mean, what comes to mind is, for me first, is this notion, actually, that Professor Tim Lindsey discussed earlier, the notion of legal security, and this idea that it's actually possible to get the police or the justice system to work according to the law. So perhaps effective and transparent judiciary would be quite an important step. Having said that, a problem that's in the Netherlands is quite persistent at the moment is financial fraud. And that doesn't mean in the sense of of corruption, but rather in the sense of frauds through banks, through companies who kind of specialize in finding the small opportunities in the tax system. So what you find is that justice systems are always somehow behind reality, it seems, because of course that's what they act for. And even if I say that on the whole, the Dutch justice system seems to work quite all right, that doesn't mean that there's no need for the justice system to speed up and address new problems here, because there definitely is.
If I'll just add, I mean, you know, I'm a UN employee, but I certainly, I'm an American. And we do see, you know, disparities at the same time in application of the law. I mean, something that is certainly widespread in many countries. We see, I mean, many of you might be aware of the sentencing project, is it not sentencing project? Gosh, I'm drawing a blank. But so many people who have been convicted of crimes and serving sentences, and later were found to be innocent. You know, in many countries, including my own country, where you have plea bargaining, which is relied on as a way of trying to relieve caseloads in courts, and where there is an emphasis on plea bargaining, which, look, plea bargaining has a role, certainly, but where at times it does end up in the wrongful conviction of an individual. That's something that really needs to be looked at, and we do see these disparities. If you are someone with the economic means in terms of being able to afford a competent lawyer and to be able to defend yourself, the outcomes can be better for that individual, versus if it's a person who does not have those means, and they could find themselves at the short end of the stick, so to speak. So we do see some of the same issues that occur here. We see that across countries, across the globe, these disparities where poor people are often the ones who suffer most when they find themselves in the criminal justice system, in instances as a defendant, where the economic means put them at a disadvantage. And I think we have to get to a place where institutions are dealing with people regardless of your economic circumstance, regarding of your ethnicity, regardless of your race. That those things do not factor in, but still too often we do see these things are playing factors, particularly within the criminal justice system.
Okay, so we come to the end of this international seminar. Could you please, to sum up, Bapak Faiz?
So there's a lot of subtopic to sum up. Yeah. There's very interesting and intriguing topic that has been delivered by all the speakers, however, allow me to sum up the general conclusion about this discussion and how the important about the SDGs, especially SDGs goals number 16, that have a correlation with other goals and as well as the targets, and how they also correlate with the implementation itself in each member states. And I believe this is a homework for us also for Indonesia. And SDGs has already been regulated in President regulation in 2017, and since there's also Budiani in here, and Bapenas also has already published the national midterm plan, and currently I've heard that Bapenas also planning to formulating the longer term national term plan for Indonesia, and I believe that most of the SDGs plan will be mentioned in our draft long-term period plan in Indonesia. And perhaps that's all, Ola.
Yeah.
I would like to conclude in general, and I would like to thank you to Dr. Lauren Becker that have been attend this international event, as well to Mr. Collie Brown, has been also attend in this great event. And I would like to move again to Ola. Perhaps
Yeah,
is
thank
there
you.
any additional what they would like to add?
Yeah, institutions play a critical role in the achievement of all the sustainable development goals and targets. The effective governance, competence, sound policy making, and collaborations will be the very ammunitions for us to build in more sustainable governance. And continually, government also must recognize the importance of putting people first of all, especially when we are talking about the human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come at the end of our international seminar. Thank you very much for your kind attentions. All the speakers who has delivered a phenomenal and comprehensive ideas on their expertise, and also all the questions that has been put forward. Thank you very much, all the lecturers and the students. I hope that we can meet again next year on the 5th Incols. And don't forget, we still have tomorrow sessions, plenary discussions. Don't forget to, if you have the time for the speakers, feel free to join in to become the panelist or the reviewer. Please prepare also for the participants who will gonna give a presentations on their research to attending tomorrow's sessions. I shall give it back to the MC, Mrs. Tachna.
Well, thank you, Dr. Aurora Dilana Meliala and Mr. Muhammad Faiz Aziz. Thank you for moderating this conference, and thank you to all speakers for a great presentation that is very beneficial for a university student like us. And I hope all audiences have listened carefully to the presentation that has been done. Please fill the attendance presents to get the e-certificate in the chat room that has been given. Don't forget to attend tomorrow's agenda, which is a paper presentation for all the presenters that have submitted their papers. Not only that, each panel will have reputable plenary speakers and moderators. So don't forget to join the occasion. Thank you and see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Pak Koli. Thank you, Pak Lawrence.
Thank you, Bu.
Ya, Pak Koli udah left ya. Pak
Yeah.
Lawrence,
Thank you very much. Goodbye. See you.
ya, bye. Pak Sinjar. sampai
Ya,
ketemu.
ada bunga-bunga duren sudah mulai nongol.
Pak Olan, makasih ya.
Pak Ola, terima
Ibu
kasih
Diani,
banyak.
thank you very much. Bapak Lawrence Baker, terima kasih. Shall we have a photograph session?
Iya, betul.
All the
Ibu
attendants,
Diani.
could you please turn on the camera?
Nah, udah.
Yeah, okay. So the first slide will be captured. 3, 2, 1, cheese.
Oh,
Okay.
Yes.
The second slide. Okay. The third slide.
What you guys do, because one of the things.
The fourth.
One of the things that we need to do is to.
The fifth. And thank you very much all. Thank you. Goodbye. Makasih banyak Ibu Diani.
Makasih sama-sama Mbak Ola.
Pak Mulyadi.
Terima kasih, Mbak Ola. Absensi dulu.
Terima kasih semua dosen dan students. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Intip ya, Mbak.
Pak Mulyadi. Terima kasih. Halo Pak Satino, apa kabar? Tambah muda aja. Aduh, seharian. Ikut Pak Satino. Ikut Incols. Jurnalnya masuk nggak?
Ikut Pak.
Nah itu, saya lupa itu nggak buat. Cuma buat yang itu aja, yang proceeding. Presentasi udah tadi ya? Udah tahu, lupa pindahan jadi nggak buat ya. Proceeding yang satu.
Jangan angkat nih jemuran, taruh belakang mau dilipetin.